U.S. President Joe Biden has urged Americans to, quote, bring down the temperature. In his first remarks to the nation since Donald Trump's election victory, Biden praised the integrity of the U.S. electoral system while telling fellow Democrats that giving up is unforgivable.
Yesterday, I spoke with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory, and I assured him that I would direct my entire administration to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition. That's what the American people deserve. Yesterday, I also spoke with Vice President Harris. She's been a partner and a public servant. She ran an inspiring campaign, and everyone got to see something that I learned early on to respect so much, her character. She has a backbone like a ramrod. She has great character, true character. She gave her whole heart and effort, and she and her entire team should be proud of the campaign they ran.
Well, for more on this, let's talk to James F. Adams. He's a professor of political science at the University of California, Davis. His focus is election strategy and political polarization. Thanks for being with us. James, we heard President Joe Biden speaking there. What responsibility does Biden bear for his party's loss?
Well, President Biden is relatively unpopular, and that certainly hurt Kamala Harris, who, as his vice president, is, of course, closely tied to him. The other factor I would name that was very difficult for Vice President Harris to overcome was the fact that Joe Biden dropped out of the race so late. That put Vice President Biden in an extremely difficult position, having to try to introduce herself to the American people and outline a policy agenda in barely over 100 days. In my opinion, that was a nearly crippling disadvantage that Kamala Harris faced, and one of the reasons that she lost.
Yet the polls ahead of the election suggested that it would be very close, and Kamala Harris ended up doing far worse against Donald Trump than the polls suggested she would. As someone who studies elections, did her loss surprise you?
The fact that Kamala Harris lost did not surprise me. The polls suggested that the election was on a knife edge. What was surprising was that the election was relatively decisive. Kamala Harris lost all 7 of the so-called swing states that were expected to decide the election, and it appears that she will be the first Democratic presidential candidate in 20 years to lose the popular vote. I'll note, incidentally, that this is the 3rd consecutive election in which Donald Trump has outperformed his polling numbers. He outperformed them dramatically in 2016, leading to an extremely surprising victory. He outperformed them modestly in 2020 and again in 2024. The outperformance in 2024 was modest, but it was enough to turn what looked to be an extraordinarily close race into a relatively clear victory.
What about Trump's campaign? Because it seemed at times chaotic. Can we talk about Donald Trump really having a winning strategy as such?
Yes, Donald Trump's campaign did appear chaotic, but then a great deal of what Donald Trump does appears chaotic. During my entire lifetime, Donald Trump is the most difficult politician I've ever seen to actually diagnose, because he's done 1,000 things that would destroy the election prospects of a typical campaigner. That raises the question, why is he able to do things that many others can't? I would mention here that some of his appeal is a populist appeal, on line with your own country's Alternative for Germany, the National Rally in France, and so on. Part of my diagnosis is that there are so many people in the United States who feel that the political system, and indeed the system more generally of education, science, the legal system, and so forth, is fundamentally run for and by those who are powerful and well-off and well-connected. Donald Trump made that point very, very powerfully. He encapsulated it in the statement that the system is rigged. There are a large number of Americans who believe that. And they also believe that Donald Trump is the only major politician who is courageous enough to say it. Some of us may not see things that way, but we have to acknowledge that there is a big market for that message.
Apparently so. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. I want to thank you very much, James F. Adams of the University of California, Davis.
Thank you.
All right, Ethan Behrman joins me now. He's a political commentator and law professor, and he's coming to us from Los Angeles. Ethan, welcome to the show. We know that Democrats are eager to figure out exactly what went wrong in this election. We just heard Joe Biden speaking there. What responsibility does he have for this loss?
Well, that's an interesting question, Stephen. Really, his responsibility goes back to allowing his team to hide what was really going on at the end before he was kind of pushed out of running for re-election. That's his responsibility. But I don't think it's anything more than that. And on the Harris campaign side, I don't know that there's a tremendous amount that we can point out that she did wrong either. Look, President Biden has, at least objectively, looking at the information, did a tremendous job in his 4 years as president. And he was handing that off to Vice President Harris. But the amount of disinformation and misinformation that now lives due to the open nature of the internet and foreign and domestic interference campaigns seem to be overpowering facts and objectivity.
Let's assume that Democrats had a kind of primary after the midterms for someone to replace Joe Biden for this campaign. Would Kamala Harris have won that primary?
That is, that's an interesting question, and we're about to find out as we head towards 2028. I mean, I look at people like California Governor Gavin Newsom as being probably the strongest candidate. You're going to see a bunch of other people throw their hats in the ring, and she'll have to compete in an open primary. She might win it, and she might not. But looking backwards, it is really hard to know. Usually a sitting vice president does have the upper hand.
You said that Harris didn't really do anything wrong in her campaign. Is it possible that she spent too much time warning about dangers to democracy, which apparently many voters cared about less than the dangers to their pocketbook?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. If there's a mistake, it's a common one that Democrats have been making in recent years, which is the high idealism, which is just simply not what the average person thinks about. The average person thinks about, how do I pay the bills? How do I put the food on the table? And how do I get health care in a country that still, and especially under the soon-to-be new presidency, really does not help the average person out to take care of their daily lives. Yes, high-minded ideals are wonderful for talking heads and for people who are in comfortable positions, but are simply not within reach for the average person who just needs to live their life.
Ethan, how concerned should Democrats be that Trump has done so well with young men, an area where Biden beat him in 2020, and that he's even made gains with young women as well compared to 2020?
Well, of course, it's concerning to look at and think that young people really are buying into the millennia-old issue that humans face, which is the appeal of autocrats and those who have the supposed strongman image of, I will take care of you. And that is basically what Donald Trump says is, I am the only one who can save you. That's a messianic message, which I would think that some of the more religious folks would reject, but they buy into. And the fact that young people love that's potentially dangerous when we look back at human history. What happens when supposed strongmen take over? You know, look, Europe is facing very serious issues from its east, the Far East, the Middle East, and those periods of human history typically don't end well for a lot of people.
Speaking of the Middle East, could you not perhaps argue that Democrats left younger voters hanging by not taking their outrage over Gaza more seriously?
Well, I think that is another classic case of misinformation and disinformation. I'm concerned that the progressive left buys into what is essentially terrorist ideology that happens in the Middle East. Hamas and Hezbollah are absolutely terrorist organizations, and to take their side on an issue is giving aid and comfort to terrorists. I mean, the Ayatollah in Iran thanked these college protesters. So again, it's a matter of educating people, and that seems to be what is falling to the wayside right now. Is misinformation and disinformation is winning, and facts and logic are losing.
We know that Donald Trump is beginning to put his transition team together, his future cabinet perhaps. He's just named his campaign manager, Susie Wiles, as chief of staff. What do you see from this coming administration? Will it be an administration of Trump loyalists, more so than we saw in 2016, in which we had some more mainstream political figures, some of them called the adults in the room? Will this administration differ?
Yes, dramatically. And that is the fundamental difference why I think some people are more concerned in 2024 than 2016. You had Paul Ryan, who was a classic conservative Republican in charge of the House of Representatives. We had people like Senator John McCain still in the United States Senate. They've been basically voted out, those types of Republicans. They pretty much don't exist anymore in the legislative branch representing the Republican Party. And Trump himself won't be putting people like General Mattis, General Kelly, and General Milley in charge. It will be people who have essentially sworn loyalty to Donald Trump. And I think that that's a very dangerous position for this country to be in.
Ethan, you're a law professor. In just a few weeks, Donald Trump is due to be sentenced in a New York courtroom after his conviction in a hush money case. What do you see happening at that appearance and with Trump's other legal cases? Will they just disappear?
Yes, the federal cases will literally do that, just disappear, because he will order his new attorney general to drop those cases. And as a result, you're seeing the Department of Justice now already starting to take action to wind down those cases. Worse, I think you were referencing the New York case where Donald Trump was found guilty of 34 felonies. We're not even going to wait till the end of November. There's a hearing on November 12th by Justice, sometimes referred to as Judge Merchan, and he is going to consider that the immunity ruling from the United States Supreme Court and the fact that Donald Trump was just reelected president may just entirely end this case now. And that hearing is on November 12th. President Trump will not be held accountable, it looks like, for anything that was happening legally over the last 4 years.
All right, a lot to watch in the coming days as we suss out the consequences of the election. That's Ethan Behrman in Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate it.